So I started this project by using my computer and an application from the OpenOffice suite called Impress. So I used Impress to figure out what the lettering should look like, the font, the size, the spacing, and all that good stuff. And what you see in this shot is a printout of what I came up with. After the lettering was figured out, I looked around the shop and found a couple of scrap pieces of pine from some old draw fronts, so I decided to use those to make the front and the back of the coin bank. So in this shot you see the printout is taped to one of the pieces of wood using duct tape, and underneath the printout is a piece of carbon paper. What I'm doing here is just using a ruler to trace over the straight lines on the printout. These lines mark the overall size of the coin bank. In this clip, I'm just going to use a pencil to trace over the lettering on the printout. With the carbon paper underneath the printout, all the letters should get transferred directly to the piece of wood underneath. Here I'm going to use the sliding miter saw just to trim up the pieces of wood to size, following the lines that were traced off of the printout. Here I have the front and the back of the coin bank just clamped together, running them quickly on the belt sander just to make sure they get to be the same size. Just to make the letters a little bit easier to see, I took a pencil and just colored in the letters a little bit. To carve the letters, I'm going to use a 90-degree V-groove bit, router bit, 1/4 inch shank. When I took a closer look at this V-groove router bit, I noticed there's a hole underneath the point. I'm not sure why the hole is there. If any of you know why, go ahead and please leave me a comment. So this is my first project using a router. So I picked up Harbor Freight's trim router. It's very inexpensive. Here I'm just setting the depth of the router bit. So I'm all set to start carving the lettering now. So you just turn on the router, set it down on one side, and then slowly drop it into place with the spinning bit over the letter that I want to carve, and then just slowly move the router and carve out the shape of the letter. With the first letter done, it's on to the rest. One of the things I noticed as I was carving these letters is that the grain of the wood sometimes affects how the router bit actually moves. So slow and steady is what's needed. Almost finished. Here's what the carved letters look like. Now I'm ready to just do some light sanding on the front just to clean it up a little bit. I'm using a piece of 80 grit sandpaper that's been glued down to a piece of 1/2 inch MDF. Here I'm using a scrub brush just to help clean out the sawdust from the lettering. Here I'm just using a real small piece of sandpaper, 220 grit, just to clean up a couple of little spots. So my design calls for making some dados on both the front and the back pieces of the bank. They're going to be 1/4 inch dados, 1/4 inch shank, Here's a picture of the router bit, and I'm going to do the routing on a router table. In this clip, I'm showing how I made the dados on both the back and the front. Those pencil marks on the fence are just used to indicate where I need to drop the board down over the router bit and then push it with the miter gauge until the back end of the board lines up with the other mark. Here's a clip that shows what the finished dados look like, and I'm using a pencil to show the mistakes, kind of overshot a number of the corners. The next time I make one of these, I will definitely make these dados in a different way. So with the lettering done and the dadoing done, I'm ready to coat the front of the coin bank with polyurethane. You'll see why in a second. I've never tried this before, so I wasn't really sure how this was going to work out. So I opted to put a really heavy, thick coat of polyurethane, actually a couple of heavy coats of polyurethane right on the lettering. I gave the polyurethane a full 24 hours to dry, and then I spray painted the lettering using Rust-Oleum black primer. I waited another day just to make sure that the primer was absolutely dry, and then it was time to sand off what wasn't inside the lettering. You can see I'm sanding with 80 grit sandpaper again, and I'm doing it all manually. I could have used a belt sander, but I haven't tried this before, so I wanted the control that manual sanding would give me. I think you can see by now that it's taking quite a long time to do all this sanding. Finally done. I think it looks pretty good. Next, I used some 1/4 inch MDF to cut out the 4 pieces that you see here. After they were all cut and sanded, I sealed them and spray painted them using the same Rust-Oleum black primer that I used for the lettering. You might notice that the piece in the middle has a little slot in it. That's the coin slot. We're finally ready for assembly. With all the pieces in place, I just put a heavy weight on top of the box while the glue dries. The weight that I'm using here is actually salvaged from an old floor lamp that one of my neighbors was getting rid of. Now we're ready for the final spray polyurethane finish. And here's what the finished coin bank looks like. Thanks for watching.